Welcome back everyone to another episode of the Crafty Crow Show. Today's video, we're going to go on a train ride through the eyes of another person. So, stick with us and come with us. Let's see what rail travel was like in Harlan back in the old days when they actually had passenger service. Okay, so I was reading a book. Yes, a real book. Believe it or not. This book was written by Miss Charlotte Nolan. The name of the book, I'll show it. I Had Spoken from the Heart. Charlotte was a well-rounded world traveler. She was an actress that done theater work over in Abington, Virginia. I think she done theater work in New York. I don't have the whole history of Charlotte, and I don't have enough time in this video to give the woman's history. She was a family friend. Her and my aunt were very good friends up until the end of her life. And she shared holidays with us, family gatherings with us. Charlotte was part of the family. So I'm sure many of you here are very familiar with Charlotte. You know, leave your comments down below. Tell us all about Charlotte, what you remember of her. But this is a book that Charlotte had wrote from just different things in her life, things that she remembered. And I was reading it the other day and come across a story of her describing riding a train and how all that worked. So I figured that just like right up here where we done the train depots, it's kind of went along with that video. We'll show you Charlotte's experience with riding a train and how it actually worked back probably in the 40s or 50s before passenger rail service stopped in Harlan. So let's get into this book and see what she says. This story is titled Brodhead Box Lunch, a tasty highlight of traveling by train. The L&N Railroad passenger train pulled into Harlan Depot every morning at 8 o'clock and left out at noon. Train and bus travel were the two main modes of transportation before and during World War II. Depots all along the line were hustling, bustling places. Freight, mail, luggage, and passengers had to be loaded or unloaded. Agents behind barred windows issued great long paper tickets to be surrendered segment by segment to uniformed conductors as one's journey progressed. Harlan was hardly more than a spur on the L&N. Corbin was the main central hub in this area, and it was there that connections were made with trains headed out in all directions. In Corbin, trains were assembled to accommodate Pullman sleeping cars, dining cars, and parlor cars, in addition to day coaches. By rail, the journey to Corbin was 4 hours long. Often travelers from this area circumvented that first leg of the journey by catching the train at the Corbin Depot. Leaving Harlan, though, by coach was an adventure. Just pulling out of the station was almost frightening as the iron horse blew blast on its whistle, hissed steam from its boilers, and laboriously chugged its way out of town. Well-wishers waved handkerchiefs and shouted above the din, "Don't talk to strangers! Don't get a cinder in your eye, and be sure to tell the conductor you want a box lunch at Brodhead." Down around Molis, the news Butch came up the aisle of the coach peddling fruit, salty peanuts, and soda pop. There were bathrooms on board, as well as a water cooler with little cone-shaped paper cups tightly jammed up in a cylindrical metal container affixed to the wall. The train hooted and hissed as it made its way out of the mountains, along the river and back fences of nearby houses. Folks sometimes waved from their yards and at crossings, hoping the engineer and passengers would wave back. After the conductor took up whatever part of the passenger's tickets he needed, and after the Butch had sold his magazines, newspapers, and edibles, the conductor made his rounds again to take orders for a box lunch. The train had no dining accommodations for coach passengers even after the train left Corbin. First-class travelers, however, were more fortunate. Dining cars were splendid places in which delicious meals were available. The service was impeccable. The dining car tables were all beautifully set with gleaming china, crystal, and silver on immaculate white linen cloths. Waiters in stiffly starched white jackets served the diners as if they were royalty. Down the line, shortly after leaving Harlan, at one of the stops, the conductor telegraphed the box lunch order for Brodhead. There, a two-story wooden boarding house was situated alongside the tracks. It was a place where railroad men lived and took their meals. The women who ran the boarding house also prepared boxed meals for coach passengers. All the meals were the same. The only choice the passengers had was the beverage, and that, too, was limited to coffee or milk. Coffee had the choices of black, with cream only, with sugar only, or with cream and sugar. The meals never varied. Fried chicken, soup beans, greens, cornbread, slaw, and a cobbler of some kind for dessert. All was apportioned in cardboard boats and fitted into a box similar to those used by bakers for carrying out cakes. Utensils were little wooden paddle-like spoons. When the train stopped briefly at Brodhead to unload freight, mail, and passengers and to take on water, helpers from the boarding house swarmed aboard the train delivering their boxed hot lunches. No food, it seemed, was ever more welcome, and no meal was ever more delicious. It was a well-established premise back then that traveling by train stimulated the appetite. Fortunately for those passengers who failed to order a boxed lunch from the conductor back down the line, the folks from the boarding house had made up some extra sandwiches for sale. Recently driving home from Lexington by way of Lancaster on Kentucky 27, I drove through Brodhead, that once bustling little railroad town about the size of Everett's, home of the L&N boxed lunch. The town was practically gone except for a few remaining businesses. The railroad yard lay derelict. Buildings were in shambles, their windows and doors boarded up. There was the boarding house, though, still standing near the tracks, but it was deserted and empty. It looked sad and lonely. I remembered how it had played such a vital role in the lives of the L&N day coach passengers before, during, and after World War II. I was one of the many from here who was frightened and at the same time thrilled to ride the train to places like Louisville, Cincinnati, Detroit, and way out to St. Louis. My anxieties were much eased, however, if the conductor just happened to be Captain Bates from Harlan, a man whose resemblance to W.C. Fields was uncanny. The heyday of the Iron Horse is gone, and so is the heyday of Brodhead's boxed lunches. They both made impressions which have lasted a lifetime. Do you remember that old corny cliche that boys and men used to jokingly yell at the depot just as the train was about to depart? All aboard! If you can't get aboard, get a plank! They thought it was a real knee slapper. Get a plank! Oh, I thought that was a pretty good story. That gave some insight, other than just looking at pictures of an actual experience riding the train. And, you know, the boarding house is not there anymore. It's just the empty lot. So what you've seen there is all that's left. You've got where the water tower used to be. We've seen how they got the intake and stuff. It's a nice little park, but just like everything else, the rail line doesn't even run through there anymore. They rerouted and it goes north to Lexington and up to Cincinnati. So, moment in time. So I thought you all might enjoy that little story of how rail travel worked and kind of personal experience from it. If you've not seen this book, though, I have spoken. You need to try to find it and get a copy of it. Like I said, Charlotte Nolan. She wrote the book. That's as far as I've got in the book. So from time to time, we will do stories out of this book because some of them is pretty comical, and it also shares some of the history here around Harlan. And any of the rest of you that's not from Harlan that's watching this, try to get a hold of this book. There's some pretty funny stories in it. So anyway, thanks for coming with us on this little video, on this little train ride. And remember to love one another as the good Lord tells you. We'll see you guys on the next video.